A television program for children made its unauspicious debut on station WQED in Pittsburgh. Its host, Fred Rogers.
Mr. Rogers?
Yeah.
I want to tell you something.
What would you like to know?
I'd like you.
He was the soft voice of American childhood. The man in the cardigan who taught kindness through a television screen.
This is what I give. I give an expression of care every day to each child.
But long after Mr. Rogers' neighborhood ended, strange whispers began to follow him. Stories of a hidden past, secret tattoos, even a military record so dark it could never be shown. None of it fit the man people thought they knew, yet the more the truth was denied, the deeper the mystery seemed to grow. As disturbing as it gets. For someone who became the symbol of gentleness in American culture, Fred Rogers sure attracted some dark stories. They began quietly, whispered on message boards and late-night talk radio, then snowballed into one of the strangest mythologies ever built around a children's TV host. The more wholesome he appeared, the wilder the rumors became. And somehow, the cardigan and the calm voice only made people more convinced that he had to be hiding something. One of the earliest and most popular claims was that Fred Rogers had once been a deadly military sniper. According to the story, before he became the friendly neighbor millions of children adored, he was supposedly a Marine Corps sharpshooter in Vietnam or Korea, depending on who told the tale, responsible for dozens of confirmed kills. Some even said that the reason he always wore long-sleeved sweaters was to hide full-arm tattoos marking his kills. It's an image so outlandish that it feels almost like a bad movie pitch. The kindest man in television secretly being one of the deadliest. The rumor grew legs in the 90s and early 2000s, spreading through chain emails, early internet forums, and eventually social media. By the time Facebook became popular, posts about Fred Rogers the Marine Sniper were being shared thousands of times, often with a photo of him smiling beside a caption that read, "Never underestimate quiet people." The truth? Fred Rogers never served in the military at all. He was never drafted, never enlisted, and never fired a weapon. In fact, he was already in his late 30s by the time the Vietnam War was raging. His calm, almost monk-like demeanor came not from the discipline of battle, but from his seminary training and lifelong dedication to children's emotional education. The long sleeves weren't hiding tattoos, they were just part of his trademark style, a way to look friendly and consistent on camera. But the sniper story wasn't the only myth. Another widely circulated rumor claimed Rogers was a convicted criminal who turned to religion after a dark past. Some versions painted him as a reformed killer, others as a fugitive who changed his identity. None of these claims had a shred of truth, but their persistence said something interesting about the public's relationship with innocence. People simply couldn't believe anyone could be that good. Not in show business, and certainly not for decades without slipping. Then came the hidden message theories. Some conspiracy-minded viewers started claiming that Mr. Rogers' neighborhood contained secret psychological programming or subtle religious indoctrination. A few even argued that his gentle tone and direct eye contact were meant to hypnotize children into obedience. These theories were more fringe than mainstream, but they circulated just enough to plant doubt. They turned a man teaching empathy into something almost eerie, as if being too kind made him suspicious. So why did people believe all this? In part, it's because Fred Rogers didn't fit the Hollywood mold. He wasn't flashy, sarcastic, or cynical. He didn't chase fame or money. He spoke slowly, smiled sincerely, and seemed to genuinely care about others, traits that, in a world of irony and scandal, began to feel unbelievable. When everyone around you is selling something, the one person who isn't seems off. And that unease turned into fascination. It didn't help that Rogers himself avoided defending against the rumors. When journalists occasionally asked about the sniper or tattoo stories, he would simply smile and change the subject. To him, attention only fueled gossip, and he preferred to let kindness speak louder than denial. That silence, of course, made some people even more convinced there was a cover-up. The mystery deepened, not because anything new was discovered, but because the truth was too simple to satisfy curiosity. As the internet grew, these tales evolved like folklore. Each retelling added new details: medals he supposedly won, secret files sealed by the government, a past erased by his fame. There were fake newspaper clippings, doctored photos of Rogers in uniform, and even a few mock documentaries on YouTube that blurred fact and fiction so well that casual viewers couldn't tell the difference. He became a sort of urban legend, the smiling assassin, the saint with a secret. In truth, Rogers lived one of the most documented, transparent lives of any public figure. His schedule, writings, and interviews were meticulously recorded. He spoke openly about his faith, his doubts, and his frustrations. He didn't drink, smoke, or curse. He didn't have scandals, affairs, or secret vices. And for some, that made him even harder to believe. The world had seen too many beloved figures fall from grace. Surely this one couldn't be real. Another rumor that popped up in the 2000s was that Rogers was gay and had hidden it from the public. The theory wasn't born from malice. Many fans actually thought it might explain his gentle, sensitive demeanor. But again, there was no evidence. Rogers was married to his college sweetheart, Joanne, for more than 50 years, and by all accounts, theirs was a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love. The speculation said more about how people stereotype kindness than it did about him. Then there was perhaps the strangest rumor of all, that Rogers wasn't even human in the metaphorical sense. Some internet corners joked, half seriously, that he was too pure to be real, as if he were an angel, a saint, or a programmed being. While those memes were often affectionate, they still came from the same place: disbelief that a person could live his entire life with quiet goodness and no scandal. It's ironic. The man who dedicated his life to helping children feel safe and seen became the subject of stories that made adults suspicious of safety and sincerity. Fred Rogers didn't change. The world around him did. As culture grew darker and entertainment leaned toward shock and cynicism, his steady warmth stood out like a candle in a storm. And when people couldn't explain light, they looked for shadows. Even after his death in 2003, the rumors kept returning in cycles. Whenever a new generation discovered his show, someone would stumble on the old myths and repeat them as fresh gossip. It became almost a ritual every decade, the same whispers, the same disbelief. Yet no matter how many times those stories spread, none ever stuck long enough to tarnish the truth. Fred Rogers's mystery wasn't that he hid a violent past, it was that he managed to live a public life of genuine goodness in a cynical world. And maybe that's why the stories never stopped. Because deep down, people weren't just questioning him, they were questioning whether goodness like his could really exist. But behind those wild stories stood someone very real and far more fascinating than any rumor could ever describe: the man behind the sweater. Before he became the most trusted neighbor in America, Fred McFeely Rogers was just a shy boy growing up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Born in 1928, he was soft-spoken, sensitive, and often sick as a child, qualities that made him a target for teasing. But those early experiences shaped him. Fred learned what it felt like to be left out, to feel small, and he promised himself that if he ever got the chance, he'd make sure no child ever felt that way again. Unlike many television personalities, Rogers didn't dream of fame. His original plan was to become a minister. He attended Rollins College in Florida, where he studied music composition. Yes, he actually wrote most of the songs on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood himself, and later studied theology at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. But his true calling revealed itself in an unexpected way. In 1951, as television began to boom, Rogers saw a children's program filled with slapstick comedy and pie throwing. He was appalled. "I saw people throwing pies at each other," he later recalled, "and I thought, this could be a wonderful tool for education. Why are we using it this way?" That moment lit a spark. He didn't just want to entertain kids, he wanted to talk to them, not at them. By the late 50s, Rogers began experimenting with children's programming, first working behind the scenes for a local Pittsburgh station. He wore many hats: producer, puppeteer, musician, before eventually stepping in front of the camera himself. What emerged was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which premiered nationally in 1968. Its format was simple. A man walks into his home, changes into his comfy sweater and sneakers, and speaks gently to the viewer about life's big and small moments. There were no explosions, no gimmicks, no laugh tracks. Just kindness, honesty, and respect for a child's mind. Rogers called it television for the real world. He tackled subjects no one else dared to: death, divorce, anger, disability, and even racial inequality, all through calm conversations and gentle storytelling. One of the most famous scenes showed Rogers soaking his feet in a kiddie pool alongside Officer Clemens, a black police officer, at a time when some public pools were still segregated. It was his quiet way of saying, "We belong together." The sweaters that became his signature? They were hand-knitted by his mother. Each one represented her love and the warmth he hoped to share with every child watching. The shoes he changed into symbolized entering a safe space, a ritual of comfort and trust. Nothing about his show was random. Every word, gesture, and pause was deliberate, designed to make the viewer feel seen and valued. Rogers' life off-camera wasn't much different. He woke up early every morning, swam laps, prayed, and wrote letters to fans, thousands of them. When children wrote to him about their fears or struggles, he often replied personally, offering encouragement or advice. He once said, "There isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you've heard their story." That was his guiding belief, and he lived by it. Still, his kindness often puzzled people. In an industry built on ego, he seemed almost alien. He didn't promote products or chase sponsors. He refused to let advertisers interrupt his show with commercials. Even his production crew admitted that the man they worked with was exactly the same person viewers saw on TV: patient, funny, and deeply attentive. But being that kind in a world that often rewards cynicism came at a cost. Rogers faced criticism from those who found his message too soft, too idealistic. Some media pundits mocked him, accusing him of creating an entitlement generation by telling kids they were special. Others called him naive, but he never wavered. "I like you just the way you are," he'd remind both kids and adults, not as flattery, but as a challenge. "You are worthy. Now act like it." When his show was in danger of losing funding in 1969, Rogers appeared before the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Communications. In just 6 minutes of heartfelt testimony, he convinced a skeptical panel, including the famously gruff Senator John Pastore, to restore $20 million in funding for public television. He didn't bring statistics or big speeches. He simply recited the lyrics to one of his songs about dealing with anger. By the time he finished, the senator was visibly moved. "Looks like you've just earned your 20 million, Pastore said. That moment captured who Fred Rogers really was, a quiet revolutionary. He didn't protest loudly or preach aggressively. He changed the world with empathy, one conversation at a time. Despite the fame that followed, Rogers kept his private life modest. He and his wife, Joanne, lived in the same home in Pittsburgh for decades. They had 2 sons and cherished a simple routine: church on Sundays, piano practice in the evenings, and dinner together every night. Fame never changed him. When strangers approached him in public, he listened to their stories as if they were old friends. Even as rumors swirled about his hidden past, Rogers never seemed angry. He often said that rumors were just a way people deal with what they don't understand. In a sense, he pitied the culture that needed to invent darkness around goodness. He believed that kindness wasn't a weakness. It was courage disguised as gentleness. When Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood finally ended in 2001, after more than 30 years, Rogers left behind more than 900 episodes and millions of adults who had grown up feeling loved by a man they'd never met. But his influence didn't end there. His speeches, writings, and interviews continued to inspire new generations who never even saw his show. In the early 2000s, as the internet age exploded, something unexpected happened. The very world he once protected children from, full of misinformation and mockery, began twisting his legacy in bizarre ways. But even though these controversies and twisted rumors would later come out online, the world still remembers a young Fred, pure, curious, and full of quiet talent, long before the cardigan and sneakers became symbols of comfort. The young Fred. Fred Rogers grew up in a big brick house on Weldon Street in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, a quiet boy in a busy world. He had one sister, Elaine, who was adopted when he was 11. While most kids were out playing, Fred often stayed inside, surrounded by puppets, stuffed animals, and the comforting sound of his piano, which he started playing at just 5 years old. His grandfather was one of the few people who made him feel seen, encouraging his curiosity and creativity. But life wasn't always kind to young Fred. He was shy, introverted, and struggled with asthma, which kept him home from school for long stretches. Kids teased him for his weight, calling him Fat Freddy, a name that cut deep. According to Won't You Be My Neighbor? Director Morgan Neville, Fred's lonely childhood pushed him to create imaginary friends, a world of make-believe that would later become the heart of his life's work. As he grew older, he slowly found his confidence. At Latrobe High School, the once quiet boy began to come out of his shell. He made friends who saw the kindness behind his reserved nature, one of them even being the head of the football team. Fred eventually became student council president, editor-in-chief of the yearbook, and a member of the National Honor Society. The same sensitivity that once made him a target was now his strength. After high school, he briefly attended Dartmouth College, but soon transferred to Rollins College in Florida, where he found his true calling in music. He graduated magna cum laude in 1951 with a degree in music composition. His ability to weave emotion into melody would later shape the gentle tone of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Fred's path took another thoughtful turn when he pursued theology. He studied at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, earning a Bachelor of Divinity degree in 1962 and becoming an ordained Presbyterian minister the following year. But unlike most ministers, Fred didn't serve in a traditional church. Instead, his pulpit was a television screen. His mission wasn't to preach, but to teach, to guide children and families toward kindness, understanding, and emotional honesty. He often returned to the church to renew his ordination, not because he had to, but because his work was always, at its core, an act of faith in people, in goodness, and in love. Life even deeper. While studying at Rollins College, Fred Rogers met the woman who would become his lifelong partner, Sarah Joanne Bird, known to everyone simply as Joanne. She was from Jacksonville, Florida, a talented pianist with the same gentle spirit and love for music that Fred had. The two married in 1952 and stayed together for more than 50 years until Fred's death in 2003. They had two sons, James and John, and though Fred was often seen as the world's TV dad, his real family always came first. Those who knew him best said he was absolutely devoted to Joanne, loyal and grounded, no matter how famous he became. Joanne wasn't just his wife. She was his musical equal and his anchor. She earned a Bachelor of Music from Rollins like Fred, later a Master's from Florida State, and spent decades performing piano duets with her college classmate Janine Morrison. Even after Fred's passing, Joanne continued to share their message of kindness and music until her own passing in 2021. Despite his fame, Fred Rogers lived an unusually modest life. He cared little about wealth and preferred simplicity. His family came from money, but Fred himself avoided extravagance. He didn't own flashy cars or luxury clothes. He wore the same kind of simple cardigan sweaters his mother knitted for him. To him, comfort and meaning always mattered more than image. Fred had some personal quirks, too. He was red-green colorblind and became a vegetarian in the early 80s, saying he couldn't eat anything that had a mother. He even became part owner of Vegetarian Times, proudly declaring his love for tofu burgers and beets. His decision wasn't just about health, it was about compassion, a principle that shaped his entire life. Spiritually, Rogers was deeply rooted in his Presbyterian faith, but he approached religion with an open heart. He believed kindness spoke louder than doctrine, once saying that, "You don't need to talk about religion to share a message of love." His show quietly reflected this belief. Every conversation, every pause, every look into the camera carried the warmth of someone who truly cared about people. Though a Christian minister, Fred studied Buddhism, Judaism, and Catholic mysticism, believing every faith held something worth learning. Politically, he was a registered Republican, but he avoided partisanship entirely. Joanne said he voted independently and rarely discussed politics, preferring to stay focused on what united people rather than what divided them. His daily routine reflected his quiet discipline. He woke before dawn, read the Bible, prayed, and swam laps at the Pittsburgh Athletic Association. He was a lifelong swimmer, something that helped him feel centered and strong. He avoided alcohol and cigarettes, kept the same weight for most of his life, 143 pounds because, as he loved to say, 143 means I love you. One letter for I, 4 for love, 3 for you. To Fred, even his weight was a message of affection. One of the most remarkable things about him was how seriously he took his connection with his audience. From the earliest days of his career, Fred personally answered letters from children and parents. Even as the volume grew into thousands each week, he continued reading and signing every response by hand. To him, this wasn't just fan mail, it was ministry, a way to reach people who needed to be heard. And though many saw him as almost too good to be real, Fred Rogers was, in truth, remarkably human, kind, curious, faithful, and wonderfully ordinary in the best possible way. Through all the rumors and theories, this quiet, sweater-wearing man never lived for fame or image. His life was built around the same message he gave to millions of children: that they were special, loved, and capable of kindness, just the way they are. After all the songs, speeches, and small screen magic, Fred Rogers never truly disappeared. He simply found new ways to share his voice with the world, beyond the cardigan. In 1969, long before the internet could turn moments viral, Fred Rogers delivered one of the most unforgettable testimonies in U.S. history. Standing before the Senate Subcommittee on Communications, a soft-spoken man in a cardigan faced off against a room full of skeptical politicians. At the time, President Nixon wanted to slash funding for public television from $20 million to $10 million. Rogers wasn't yet a national celebrity, but PBS officials believed he could do something few could: make senators feel what was at stake. And he did. In calm, simple words, Rogers described his mission: helping children understand their feelings through kindness, honesty, and love. He recited the lyrics of one of his songs, "What Do You Do with the Mad That You Feel?" explaining how children could learn to handle anger in healthy ways. It was raw, human, and real. By the time he finished, Senator John Pastore, known for his tough demeanor, was visibly moved. "I think it's wonderful," he said quietly. "Looks like you just earned your $20 million. That moment didn't just save PBS. It changed the way people saw children's television. Funding for PBS was not only restored, but increased to $22 million. To this day, Rogers's testimony is studied in communication and public relations courses as a masterclass in emotional honesty and persuasion. Proof that sincerity can be more powerful than spectacle. But Fred Rogers didn't stop there. In 1970, President Nixon appointed him as chair of the White House Conference on Children and Youth, recognizing his deep understanding of childhood development. Even as his fame grew, Rogers stayed focused on one thing: helping families connect in a noisy, confusing world. During a brief hiatus from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in 1978, he created a new show for adults called Old Friends, New Friends. It was a gentle 30-minute program where Rogers interviewed guests like Helen Hayes, Hoagie Carmichael, and baseball legend Willie Stargell. There were no flashy graphics or dramatic edits, just genuine conversations about life, purpose, and kindness. In 1987, Rogers crossed international borders when he appeared on Good Night, Little Ones, the Soviet Union's beloved children's program. The moment was symbolic: a friendly American figure on Soviet TV during the Cold War. His appearance aired the same week as the Washington summit between Gorbachev and Reagan, showing that compassion could reach where politics couldn't. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Rogers continued to create special programs for PBS, including Fred Rogers' Heroes in 1994, which highlighted ordinary people making extraordinary differences in children's lives. And in 1996, he stepped briefly into a fictional role, appearing as a preacher in an episode of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, his only scripted television performance. Despite his fame, Rogers remained remarkably humble. He gave hundreds of interviews and over 150 commencement speeches, often preferring small, thoughtful audiences over large, glamorous ones. Before each speech, he would spend hours rewriting and reflecting, making sure every word felt sincere. Those who saw him speak said he had a quiet intensity, the kind that didn't demand attention, but earned it effortlessly. His most famous speeches, from his Lifetime Achievement Emmy in 1997 to his final address at Dartmouth College in 2002, always included one signature moment. He would ask the audience to pause in silence and think of someone who had helped them become who they were. That simple invitation, just 60 seconds of quiet, would often leave thousands in tears. Through decades of fame, Fred Rogers never lost his sense of mission. Whether speaking to a Senate hearing or a kindergarten class, he believed the same thing.
During my first year here, I lived right over there at 101 Middle Mass.
That kindness could heal, honesty could teach, and love could change the world. No goodbyes, just great tributes. After retiring in 2001, Fred Rogers didn't simply fade from public life. He continued working with Family Communications Incorporated, FCI, studying religion and spirituality, traveling, making public appearances, and collaborating with Archibald Douglas Nowitzki of St. Vincent College in Latrobe to establish a children's media center in his name. By the summer of 2002, Rogers began suffering from persistent stomach pain, which led him to seek medical advice. In October of that year, he was diagnosed with stomach cancer. Ever dedicated, he postponed treatment until after fulfilling one last public commitment, serving as Grand Marshal of the 2003 Rose Parade, alongside Art Linkletter and Bill Cosby. On January 6, 2003, he underwent surgery, but his health declined rapidly afterward. Less than 2 months later, on February 27, 2003, Fred Rogers passed away at his Pittsburgh home at the age of 74, with his wife of 50 years, Joanne, by his side. While he was comatose shortly before his death, he received the last rites of the Catholic Church from Archibald Nowitzki. News of his passing deeply affected the nation. The following day, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette featured Rogers on the front page and devoted an entire section to his life and impact. By noon, tributes and heartfelt essays were already flooding the internet from parents, viewers, and colleagues alike. Across the country, major newspapers ran front-page obituaries, and many dedicated full sections to celebrating his legacy. That evening, WQED, the station where Mr. Rogers' neighborhood began, aired special programming honoring him, drawing viewership 3 times higher than usual. ABC's Nightline re-aired a recent interview with Rogers, becoming the most-watched broadcast of the day, even surpassing the ratings of The Late Show with David Letterman and The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. On March 4, 2003, the U.S. House of Representatives unanimously passed a resolution honoring Rogers, introduced by Pennsylvania Representative Mike Doyle. A private funeral followed on March 1st at Unity Chapel, a small church restored by Rogers' father in Latrobe. About 80 close family members, friends, and colleagues attended the quiet service, which was deliberately kept private so loved ones could grieve without public intrusion. Reverend John McCall, pastor of the Rogers family's church, delivered the homily, while Reverend William Barker, a close friend and the voice of Mr. Platypus on the show, read Rogers' favorite Bible passages. Rogers was laid to rest in the family mausoleum at Unity Cemetery in his hometown of Latrobe, Pennsylvania. A public memorial was later held on May 3, 2003, at Heinz Hall in Pittsburgh. Around 2,700 people attended, a reflection of how deeply his message had touched the world. The event featured performances by violinist Itzhak Perlman, cellist Yo-Yo Ma through video, and organist Alan Morrison. Reverend Barker officiated, with moving tributes from prominent figures, including philanthropist Elsie Hillman, Good Morning America host David Hartman, the Very Hungry Caterpillar author Eric Carle, and Arthur creator Mark Brown. Additional speakers included Teresa Hines, PBS President Pat Mitchell, and Salim Gubril of the Pittsburgh Project. One of the most emotional moments came when Jeff Erlanger, who had appeared on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as a 10-year-old to talk about his wheelchair, shared his memories of Fred. The memorial was broadcast several times that day across Pittsburgh television stations and online, allowing thousands more to say goodbye to the man who made the world a little kinder. Maybe the real mystery of Fred Rogers isn't what he hid, but how he stayed so good in a world that often isn't. If his story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories.